There was an interesting study that many of you may have heard of, done by the Journal of American Medical Association last fall, where they looked at the solicited information from medical schools on student activities. And the results of that study, one of them was that 13% of the schools reported violations of patient confidentiality through their student blogs, where they were blogging with enough information to identify patients in those posts. And I could go on with other examples of posting very graphic surgery photos. There was a medical student that posed with a sort of thumbs up and a smile next to a cadaver that was circulating on Facebook. You know, these are, is it identifiable to the patient is one issue, and then of course there's the unprofessional ethical concerns that raises as well. One way to address this is, of course, with notices and disclaimers. If you're in a practice or a hospital, you know, addressing how you're going to be using social media and what context you would. And of course, obtaining patient consent if you ever were to use any information. I wanted to touch briefly on the public forum versus physician-only forum, and I'll come back to this again in a couple of minutes. But these, and Sermo is one that was mentioned earlier, there's Osmosis, there are a number of sites that are geared to be places where only physicians are discussing issues. The security issues there of including patient information are still present. They may be more limited because presumably only physicians are online in this group. However, it's not necessarily within a treatment relationship. So to provide patient information in that setting still is not recommended and presents risks with penalties and so forth under various laws. I wanted to turn to some liability issues other than privacy. So this was one that I happen to enjoy. So this of course highlights the idea of relying on information out there and the liability that might go to that under standard of care and potential malpractice and so forth. But there are a number of liability concerns that practicing using information based on social media can present, and some of them are not unique to social media. They've been around as long as we've had telephone and now email and other forms of communication. One would be the licensure issues that are presented. So for example, if someone puts a question up on a Facebook page, if you as a physician respond to it, it might look like medical advice is being dispensed with, and if so, if that person is located in another state, arguably have a licensure issue practicing medicine out of state. If it's, someone might find that that was a patient relationship, then you could have patient abandonment, alleged malpractice, and you can see where this goes. So this isn't a new issue, but social media being so broad and so widely accessible sort of exacerbates some of these issues. Also, the fact that Twitter, it's concise, it's great that it's 140 characters, you can get information in there. However, there's not enough room to put a disclaimer, much like many now put on websites, that this is for informational, educational purposes, not dispensing medical advice, go to the ER, call your physician in the case of an emergency, and so forth. There's not enough room to do that in Twitter, and this is something that is an issue for pharmaceutical advertising and for professional physician and other healthcare professionals as well. The standard of care, I wanted to touch on that. Of course, relying on information that you find on a blog in another place. You have to use standard of care as that to rely on that. And it's similar in some ways to the water cooler conversation, the casual advice in the doctor's lounge. I've seen one person refer to this as you get what you pay for, so it's free, so you should rely on it to that extent. So you still would want to use your usual practice of verification, picking up the phone, sending a direct email to that person before actually, of course, just relying on it. The flip side, which is an interesting issue, of course, is will it become standard of care to be searching and doing research for others who have done similar issues, cases, had some similar issues arise in fact patterns? Will this become standard of care? And even more extreme, the ethical discussion that I've seen starting of should physicians be accessing information about their patients that could be found online, and how far down that line can you go? I would say that at least from a legal perspective, you would want patient consent before you start looking up more information on your patients online beyond what you've gleaned from taking a history and actual visits. But it's an interesting ethical dilemma that I have seen starting to be written about. Just briefly, the online consultations, using Sermo and other sites where it's physician only for discussions and educational is a fabulous tool. Getting into the realm of actually having a consult online in a not public like Facebook, but a very large forum, presents in particular some privacy risks, leaving aside legal and ethical standard of care type issues. So focusing on the privacy aspects, you may put it up, it may be in what is supposed to be a secure site. However, there might be someone on there who should not be. So inadvertent disclosures to individuals, other than those who are providing the consultation, security breaches of the site on its own, which are not unfathomable. Misuse of any of the patient information that you had put up there by others, and then of course intentional deception by someone pretending to be a physician to get in there, and so on. So even though you put it up and you think it's secure, at the time it was, once it's out there in the blogosphere, things take on a life of their own. You can't necessarily control where they end up. You can try and manage it, but you can't necessarily control it. And again, related to this would be, of course, considering how valuable is such a consultation and balancing that against the risk. Would you have the same value in reaching out through a secure email consult or even picking up the phone as opposed to doing it in such a public format? Finally, I wanted to turn to liability. I want to touch on the impact on litigation. Employers and insurance companies are now searching social network sites for inappropriate behavior, both as part of hiring and firing decisions. In litigation, this is being used where, particularly in your insurance and workers' comp type cases, to discredit someone seeking a claim, that this is being used. And some of you may have heard about the Boston blogging case where a physician was blogging his way through a malpractice trial and his identity was revealed when he was on the witness stand, which turned into a settlement then about a day later. There's a very big lesson here in that anonymity, and we talked about this in terms of picking your username. Are you truly anonymous on the web? That he had a name, but people could figure out what the trial was. And what he was doing in this case is that he actually was not only blogging about the complaint itself, which was a public document, but actually about depositions, meeting with his attorneys, and so forth, which could have led to losing the attorney-client privilege in that case. So, and anonymity is a hard thing to come by these days, so it's something to be cautious about. The question has come up about discoverability and admissibility of if you post something in a physician-only site, is it discoverable? There's little case law, if any, on any privilege protecting these types of deliberative communications. Privileges such as a peer review privilege or physician-patient privilege likely would not apply, and courts tend to be very stringent in applying privileges. Whether such information is ultimately admitted into a trial is very based on the judge's views and is evidence-based, but what it actually being discoverable is usually a broader net. So don't rely on it not ever coming out when you post something or write something. That would be my point on that one. So just some general tips here. Again, limit risks to the best you can with patient consent, disclaimers, notices, and policies. In terms of a surgeon-patient relationship, don't respond to personal medical questions in a public forum. Reply with a "call me in the office," or don't even reply, just call them. Something along those lines, but don't respond to those. Do use personal phone calls, Encrypted email or secured messaging, you know, more and more health systems as part of their EMRs and others are setting up ways for secure patient-physician communication. So in that realm, you know, proceed, but the public forum is a risk, of course. And in the surgeon-to-surgeon realm, consider the forum, exercise your professional judgment in what you post, what you put out there. The other piece here will be to consider the privacy policies of these sites. See what they say that they're going to do with the information. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on two things. You know, this is an evolving area. So I thought this one worked a little bit with my next point, which is this is evolving. I've talked a lot about privacy and HIPAA, but there are a lot of other regulatory agencies that have their way out there. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to do a lot on this. I'm happy to address questions afterwards. But both the FDA, the FTC, and even Congress are interested in this area on social networking. There's proposed federal legislation that's not specific to healthcare, but generally about privacy of individuals on the web. And in the pharmaceutical, advertising, and promotion area, this is an area that's been carefully looked at by the FDA and others. There are, of course, ethical concerns about social media and physicians. I mentioned the JAMA study earlier, but this had a high report. About 60% of medical schools reported student posting unprofessional content, 52% reported use of profanity, 48% discriminatory language, and so on. So there's a high curve here of educating. We have a generation of people who've now been growing up using public forums, and the differential between your personal and your private becomes very big. Probably don't have time to get into the friending issue here, but the blurring of professional-patient relationships. I would suggest considering having a separate profile for your personal. If you have a Facebook page for your family, your close friends, but distinguishing that from your professional, and whether you have another Facebook page for your practice or a LinkedIn account, but differentiating them. And then hospitals, medical schools, and the AMA, this is being studied about what to do with social medical policies and using social networking. So that's those are some of the very quick spin on some of the ethical concerns. And my last two slides are just on some general do's and don'ts. Privacy rules apply online. Don't post or disclose identifying information, you know, that you wouldn't put out any other way. Use consents and disclaimers to the extent you can. And with your own personal activities within your practice, consider there are other employer policies, malpractice policies, hospital medical staff policies. There may be policies that actually address your activity that you may not have initially considered. Take a look at what's being done there. To the extent social networking policies are being developed within your practice, for yourself, within a hospital, get involved, be part of the discussion. And then understand and use the networking settings and so forth. Zach was talking about those earlier. Look at what they say to the extent you can make sure that information you post doesn't get forwarded to others, to the extent that's even possible. You know, look at those settings and consider them. And exercise good judgment. Assume that what you put out there is out there forever. It's public. It may never go away. It can be found later. And my ultimate point is, you know, proceed. There's a lot of value here. There are a lot of benefits, but do so with caution and using professional judgment as you do so. Thank you.